Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mariela Salinas, and I'm a digital marketing specialist here at United Training. Welcome to today's webinar, ITIL Fundamentals, What You Need to Know, presented by Michael Peasley. We are using the GoToWebinar platform for today's session, and we will be sharing a copy of this recording with you. We do encourage participation throughout the event, so please use the questions option in your GoToWebinar dashboard for our Q&A portion after the presentation. United Training is excited to present this webinar today. I'll now hand it over to you, Michael.
All right, well, thank you very much. Am I still showing my screen? I just want to make sure that everyone can see it. So,
Yeah, you're good to
welcome.
go.
Okay, great. So again, welcome to the ITIL Fundamentals, what you need to know. And as you can see, that's my information there. You can pull that out of the recording if you want to go look at that. Also, I am on LinkedIn, so if you wanted to reach out, form a professional connection, feel free to reach out. I do have a number of other certifications, project management, professional, Lean Six Sigma, a number of other things, but most on point here, I am an ITIL 4 managing professional and strategic leader. And we are going to talk a little bit about the certification program. So you can see the session agenda, a brief history of ITIL. I'm sure you don't want to see the in-depth version of that. Some basic concepts of ITIL, IT service manager, what a service is, things like that. What are the overall business benefits of IT service management in general and the ITIL as a specific framework for IT service management? And then a little bit of an overview of the certification structure. And if you have any questions that come up, again, feel free to drop those into the chat. So, the brief history, kind of interesting that a government entity would have this type of foresight, but in England in the 80s, the Office of Government Commerce, kind of like our Commerce Department, I would assume here in the United States, recognized IT service management as a critical business capability. And if you think about it, in the 80s, you didn't have the degree of integration of business and IT that you do today. I even look at it where I started looking at IT and the business world really starting to become a thing. I even go into the 90s, right? So what they did, and you can see here the evolution from version 1 to version 2 and version 3, and then in 2011 they came up with the version 3 2011 refresh. Somebody in marketing didn't really pay attention there. Anyway, what we are now is ITIL version 4. And what they did is they went out to external service providers. This is the OGC. And they said if a company is an external service provider, they have figured out a way to sell a service for greater than the cost of provisioning that service, to sell it at a profit. Well, if we teach internal IT departments to behave the same way, if they make a profit, as in they provide greater value through a service than the cost of provisioning, rather than that, if you will, profit going to an external service provider, that profit stays inside of our company. So they took good practices from external service providers and created a framework, a governance framework that is geared towards not only internal, because it still could speak to external third-party service providers, but it is designed to have your internal IT department operate as though it's an actual business. And when you look at the original where IT first came into the business world, it was just technology being used to replace other types of activities. The one I always say, the first IT service was word processing, and it was not too hard to decide that word processor on a computer was a lot better than a typewriter. If you've never typed on a typewriter, trust me. So that's where it kind of started. Well, now look where we are. It's not just something as basic as a word processor. And indeed, the ITIL 4 talks about the digital transformation. This movement of the business into new ways of doing business. Oh, I don't know, like doing online classes, as opposed to when I started in the training industry last century, I used to go every day to a building and teach classes to students in a classroom, very traditional. Well, not just because of the pandemic, but also because of it. Haven't done that in a couple of years. The majority of the training industry now, as you probably experience it, you can still go to classes. We still do some of it, but the majority of it is all now enabled by digital technology. And especially during the pandemic, uh, obviously digital technology was used to preserve the business, to keep the business many businesses functioning, those that could. So basic concepts to cover, and I'm not going to go through these in depth, because what you're looking at here, when we go through all of this stuff in depth, it's a couple of days worth of content. So again, just got to give you a quick overview: what services are, what service management, a service provider, and then some what I call the critical components of the ITIL 4 framework. And if you were to come to our class, you take any class, an ITIL Foundations class, those are the 4 items: the guiding principles, the 4 dimensions of service management, the service value system, and the service value chain are items that I always tell my students they need to make sure that they have those concepts locked down, because that really is the core concepts. Those are the core concepts of ITIL 4. So service management, a set of specialized organizational capabilities for enabling value for customers in the form of services. It isn't just about managing technology, it's facilitating business activity, making workers more productive. I've used the example of our online training. I teach to a worldwide audience. I am waiting for somebody to remote into one of my classes from Antarctica. If and when that occurs, I will have taught to every continent on the planet sitting right here in my basement. So IT services enable businesses to do things in different ways, to capture new markets. And so service management is not just managing technology, it's managing technology to create services. Now, a service, a means of enabling value co-creation by facilitating outcomes that customers want to achieve without them recognizing the costs and risks specific. What this is saying is the business, in effect, outsources IT provision to the IT department. Our job is to use technology to create value, whatever that is in the context of an organization: greater revenue, social good, again, whatever the organizational goals or the organization mission is, facilitating those without them having to deal with the specific costs and risks. Specific. Now, obviously, if we're an internal service provider, they're paying for us. So they are paying the business by they, paying the sum total of costs, but they don't recognize those specific costs. And the uncertainty of service provision, well, that's what we're supposed to be taking away from them, and we call that risk. So providing a layer, if you will, between our business users and the technology. And it's funny, when I teach ITIL classes, we don't talk about technology. We talk a little bit about IT service management technology, tools to facilitate that, but we don't talk about Microsoft or Cisco or Citrix or any specific technologies. It's all about human beings on the service provider side using technology to enable the people on the business side to do what they need to do. So the service provider, a role performed by an organization in a service relationship to provide services to consumers. Your average user does not want to hear about any component, the exchange server, router, switch, any of it. They want to talk about their email service. And so when we are speaking to them, we use the language or the terminology around a service. And yeah, there's technology there in the background, but your average business user doesn't want to understand the technology, at least the back end of it. They want their service to function. And we've got to, much like in a contractual negotiation from an external service provider, negotiate with, as a provider, with the internal customers as to what are their expectations in terms of the availability of a service, the continuity, the security, we call all that warranty, as well as what does it need to do. And it's a a collaborative relationship between the provider and the customer, the consumer, the business, whatever you want to call them, about what are the services that are required to facilitate what the business wants to accomplish, and we're the person or the group to do that. All right, so something like the guiding principles obviously are a critical component of a framework. And these guiding principles, they have kind of a bold statement. They are said to be able to guide our actions in all circumstances. Like I said, that's a pretty tall order, but if you take a look at these principles, they are, I don't want to call them vague enough, but they're more general, that they are rather universally applicable, right? What is value in our organization? What do we consider to be value? And different organizations value different things. Start where you are. Don't throw out everything. If you're building something, look and see what you have that is working and build off of that. Also, a generic concept in improvement is, in order to improve, you need to know where you really are and then improve off of that. If any of you are at all familiar with agile, agile has made a significant inroad, if you will, into the ITIL framework. And progressing iteratively with feedback is really a statement. They say do not attempt to do everything at once, but in an agile type of project, we pick the first group of features we're going to create. We go create those features. We go to the customer. We say, what do you think? And then rinse and repeat. Progress iteratively with feedback. Collaborate, promote visibility. It's not us and them. We may be the internal service provider, but we're all part of the same company. And while at times there is the need for super secret strategic imperatives that we keep relatively unknown, for the most part, everything we're doing in IT, if the customer cares to know about it, we should be able to have that type of visibility and creating that trust and collaboration between the provider and the customer. Thinking, working holistically. Break down silos, cut across organizational boundaries. No service or element used to provide service stands alone. And so when we think and work holistically, we can talk about when we're designing something, getting everybody's involvement. And we're also going to talk about in the next slide something called the 4 dimensions. And I always tell people that the 4 dimensions really are an expression or a representation of thinking and working holistically. Consider the whole. We'll see that on the next slide. A lot of, frameworks, methodologies have this type of concept of keep it simple and practical. Usually it's keep it simple, stupid, right? But keep it simple and practical. Don't overdo it. Don't over-engineer it. If something provides no value, no useful outcome, eliminate it. And that's really aligning with lean thinking, which is also within project management and operations management. And optimize and automate, improve, continually improve, and anywhere you can use technology as opposed to human beings, we would use it, as they phrase it, human intervention should only happen where it really contributes value. And automation, obviously, we see a lot more of automation in terms of call centers and things like that, chatbots and other technologies like that getting their way into IT support. So as I mentioned, if we are, going to think and work holistically and create products and services that create value, we need to consider the 4 dimensions and the 6 pestle factors. Our org structures and the people, our staffing, their skills, the actual information and technology that we are utilizing and that we are managing. Our partners and suppliers, because nobody does it all themselves. And then value streams and processes. Now, the ITIL has always contained something called processes, incident management process, problem management process, break fix type of activities in terms of help desk or what we call service desk. ITIL 4 kind of did a little bit of a terminology change, and now that I look at it, it definitely is the more correct way of looking at it. Something like incident management, break fix at the service desk is not one discrete process, it's called a practice. So we would have processes within a practice but it's multiple processes. So something like incident management, we now call a practice. And there are 34 different practices that you could potentially implement in terms of infrastructure or service management. Notice I said could. The ITIL is what's called a descriptive framework as opposed to a prescriptive methodology. So you consider those four. You also consider your PESTLE factors: political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental factors, which, all of those things do from the outside impact our organization to a greater or lesser degree. And so the holistic approach is everything we do, we consider the four dimensions and the six PESTLE factors. A couple of other items that you will be exposed to: the service value system, an operating model, if you will, that starts with, over here on the left, there's an opportunity, a demand. Our consumers need a service. We go through the service value chain. We're going to take a quick look at that on the next slide. And as we go through the activities of the service value chain, we achieve value. That value chain is surrounded by those guiding principles that we were just talking about. The concept of governance, making sure that we are doing what is best for the organization, our practices, which facilitate that, as I was just talking about, incident management, change management, things like that. And the continual improvement. And this is one of the, again, hallmarks of ITIL and pretty much all of the governance frameworks, always looking to improve, continual improvement. In the center of that, I should go, if you saw in the center of that diagram for the service value system, there was the service value chain. There we go. Sorry, I was missing a transition there. And I talked briefly about processes, but also under those dimensions was something called value streams or value stream maps. And one of the key focus areas in ITIL 4 is value stream mapping. And this service value chain is kind of a generic model onto which or with which we could create value streams. Now, value stream mapping is a lean concept, and we want to look at every step within a value stream to make sure it's providing value. Guiding principle focus on value as well. So everything we do in terms of a value stream when we're managing services is an engage activity where we're engaging with stakeholders, a planning activity where we're planning how we're going to engage or do other work, designing something or launching something, design in transition, and if need be, either obtain or build it, buy it through a supplier or build it ourselves. Once something is fully created, we transition it into operations, deliver, and support, and that's service desk, and like I said, incident management, problem management, things like that. Those products and services that create value, and of course, we're always looking to improve. So the service value chain. All right. So what are the benefits of ITIL? And you can see there, I pulled up from an article. You do any number of Google searches, there's a plethora of articles about the benefits of ITIL. Very basic benefits: better services, higher satisfaction with services, greater satisfaction of people in IT because it's much more fun to play for a winning team, a successful team, as opposed to one that's not successful. And the idea is that by doing a better job of managing services, more satisfied customers who are happier customers, and that adds to the motivation and satisfaction of our IT staff. So there's a lot of very basic benefits. This is kind of a unique list. A modular structure encourages continuous improvement. There are many different mechanisms within. There's an actual practice called continual improvement. There's the improve activity within the service value chain. There's something called the continual improvement model. And those are all structures to encourage continuous improvement. We are never there. You are either improving or your competitors are improving past you, which puts you in danger, more so than ever. The service value chain embeds the ITIL framework across the entire organization. This is something that's kind of a bit of an evolution in ITIL. It was oftentimes seen as just something for IT, and it does really govern IT activities. But if we are going to have this true collaboration, if we are going to have good services and good service management, that requires that the customer side, if you will, also participates on some level and aligns their activities with the framework. New ways of working to improve service efficiency. I mentioned agile, which is kind of a newer uh, input or type of way of managing projects. But we also have DevOps. If any of you out there have heard of DevOps, there's a whole certification program and the methodology of DevOps. Well, DevOps as well as Agile have worked their way in. And ultimately, Agile, I guess you could call it agnostic about how you approach work. You could do it through the Agile, or excuse me, ITIL. You could do it through the Agile. You could do it through a traditional date-driven project management. You could implement DevOps. Uh, Many of these frameworks are designed to be more easily integrated. And I mentioned, I think at the top, Six Sigma. Six Sigma is a process improvement methodology, which certainly could be brought in to the ITIL, looking at repetitive process and using something like Six Sigma. So new ways of working for better services and greater service efficiency. And international quality standards for IT service delivery. There is the International Organization of Standardization, ISO, the ISO 20000 standard for IT service management is actually built off of the ITIL. So if you were to, as an organization, implement the ITIL 4 framework, you could start to, well, now I guess, promote the fact that you are aligned with international standards by implementing the ITIL. And you can see there's an article where I pulled those from. It's got some pretty good information. And again, you can pull that from the recording that we're going to send out to you. And then the last item I wanted to cover here briefly is the certification structure. We offer a one-day ITIL awareness class, which is just an abbreviated version of the two-day ITIL foundations. But if you feel as though this is something brand new to you, you could do both the awareness as well as the foundations. But if you have a decent amount of IT experience, I think most people can jump right in at that ITIL foundations level. And you can see down here the excelos.com certifications where they lay this out. And you can go and you can look at each of these individual either specialist or strategist classes. There's no specific order that you would go through. It's kind of strange, but again, I've reviewed this pretty diligently and found no specific order recommended from them. What we're finding is most people are going through the managing professional first, and then they notice this common or universal module that's called direct, plan, and improve. Once you take these 4 classes, pass those 4 tests, one more class, one more test, and you could be what we call a strategic leader. And the managing professional strategic leader are pretty much the highest level certifications in the ITIL stream right now. That ITIL master designation, I think there's been about 100 people in the history of the ITIL. It's a peer-reviewed white paper process that really isn't part of the training industry. So in terms of the ITIL, from a practical sense, ITIL certifications, the managing professional and the strategic leader are the highest level. This transition class, in the old version, they had something called ITIL expert. And if you were an ITIL expert, you could cut over. So if somebody in your organization is an ITIL expert, they should probably look at that class. But for everyone else going through it, you kind of start at the bottom and then work your way up to these different ones. And they cover different areas of service management. And if you go to that Excelos website, you will be able to see the target audience, the syllabus, and who that class is geared towards. All right. Well, it's supposed to be a quick 20-minute one, and I think I'm about 20 minutes there, so might be a little bit longer there. Does anybody have any questions? And then again, there are my certs email address, as well as my LinkedIn information. Does anybody have any questions? And if not, I appreciate all of you tuning in to hear me talk about the ITIL. So anybody with any questions, let me know.
Yeah, we got a couple here. So,
Okay.
first one here, do we need to study all of the ITIL versions? I know this is ITIL 4, but do we need to
Mm-hmm.
study for 1, 2, or 3?
Nope, nope. The matter of fact, they completely isolated ITIL 4. They used to let you use a previous ITIL certification, and ITIL 4 they don't. So you would just, if you're going to go do training, you're just going to study ITIL 4. So
Awesome.
start at foundations and work your way up.
Another question here. Is the ITIL framework suitable for cloud adoption, or is it a process to manage and maintain the business continually?
Um, is it for like cloud-based? Is that what the question was? For a cloud-based
Yes,
organization?
yeah, cloud-based.
All of the above. It could apply to cloud-based services. It could apply to organizations that are doing internally hosted services. It really doesn't discriminate. It includes both. So I guess the answer to that is yes. It would cover cloud-based.
Awesome. We have another question here. Um, did I hear you say there is 1 day ITIL Foundation training sessions? Where do we find out more about that?
If you contact your United Training account rep, there is a 1 day ITIL awareness class. And foundations, let me foundations class, you do not technically have to take training. So could you take the 1 day awareness class and take the foundations exam? Yes. Would I recommend that? If you have experience with previous versions of ITIL, I think you probably could do the awareness class and take the exam, but my recommendation, unless you have previous certifications, is that you should take the 2 day ITIL foundations. So it's not called foundations, it's called 1 day awareness, but it's a lot of the same content. So I would say if you're going to take the foundations, I would recommend not taking the awareness because it's largely redundant.
Perfect. We have another question here from James. Would you recommend ITIL as an equivalent to PMP?
Wow. They are PMP is project management, and the ITIL says to turn changes over to projects, so they're related. But one is project management, the other is infrastructure management. So just from in terms of what the frameworks do. If you're talking about like in terms of the certification, I do think that the ITIL exams are very similar to the PMP exams. Uh, so there's a definite similarity in the exam format and how you approach questions. The two frameworks very much align. When I teach PMI classes, I'm talking ITIL. When I teach ITIL classes, I talk PMI. So yeah, there's an awful lot of equivalence. I don't know, are ITIL certifications as, let's say, if you want to talk value to an individual, the PMP certification is kind of universally recognized. It's been around for forever and a day, and it covers and cuts across multiple industries. Whereas, and practices, you have project management marketing departments, you have IT project management, you have sales project management. So in terms of a certification and its value to an individual, I'd have to go with the PMP just because it's more broadly applicable. But boy, there are a lot of organizations that are doing ITIL, and having an ITIL certification is definitely going to be an inroad into those organizations. So a couple of different ways to view, is it roughly equivalent? A lot of yes.
Awesome.
Anything
Great
else?
question, James. We have one more question here, or we actually have two. Would an IT specialist attend ITIL to move into a management role?
Yeah, I have a lot of people who that's why they are attending. An organization that has decided to adopt the ITIL as a governance structure and to help managers govern, um, it's definitely going to. So yes, I do have people who in all those classes who say, I'm taking this because my boss is prepping me for a management position. So I would say yes.
Alrighty. And last question here, it looks like, would you consider ITIL as a way to build your organization's IT policy?
Yeah, there we do talk about how you have a framework. And again, we adopt these guiding principles, and there is a bit of a cascade from principles to framework to policy. So here's the limitation of this. ITIL is never going to tell you what your policy needs to be. It's just going to tell you you need to have a policy. So it's not going to tell you what is, let's say, a standard change versus a normal change. It's going to say you need to come up with what your standard is. So it's very descriptive as opposed to prescriptive. So
We have one last one here, a little sneaky question in. How hard is the exam after attending the 2-day course?
well, that depends who you ask, I guess. It is the foundations exam is it's not an easy exam, but it's not. You know, when someone's talking about the PMP, I would say the PMP exam is far more difficult for no other reason. The PMP exam is 200 questions, and ITIL Foundations is only 40. But I will also say that, you know, like the PMP exam, they have a lot of trick questions. ITIL doesn't have a lot of tricky questions. We have a very high pass rate. You know, I don't get to see my pass rate in open enrollment classes, but back in the day when we did group classes, and we'll get back there someday again, you know, we used to see an 80, 85% pass rate. Um, so yeah, it's a very passable exam. If you, I think most people, if you get the concepts and you study the material, you'll have a pretty high rate of success. So
Alrighty, well, that looks like it was the last question. Got a bunch of great ones. Thank you so much, Michael. This was
you are
awesome
most welcome.
info.
All right,
And again,
thank
we
you.
will be sharing this recording with you guys. So if you have any other questions after the webinar, just go ahead and follow up with us. Again, enjoy the rest of your day, guys. And thanks again for attending.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great one.